what's happened in our society is that the sacred has become political. And that's really bad, because there's a space for the sacred and there's a space for the political. That's why you render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. And you don't want to confuse the two, because if you do, then God becomes Caesar, and that's not a good thing. And Caesar becomes God, and that is a much worse thing. And that's the situation that we're in. And so that means, and this is part of the conundrum that we have, and maybe it's part of what Nietzsche prognosticated too, because he believed that the consequence of the death of God would be that human beings would have to create their own values. And I believe that's wrong. I don't believe we can create our own values, but to give Nietzsche his due, which is always an important thing to do because he was a genius, it certainly is the case that we have to rethink. It seems to be that we have to rethink what identity is from first principles. Now, can we do that successfully? We're going to find out, because the culture war is a war because of the difficulty of rethinking identity from first principles. What is it? Is it political? Is it ethnic? Is it racial? Is it economic? Is it desire? Jonathan pointed to that. Are you nothing but what it is that you want, or what something within you wants? Is it subjective? Like, is your identity only something that you control? All of those questions, that's like 10 questions. Every single one of those questions is extraordinarily difficult, and we seem to be stuck with all of them. So, we're going to try tonight to see if we can take identity apart from first principles and see where we get with it. And so let's start with something basic. One of the things that I thought through deeply when I was a university professor was how to evaluate someone's writing, right? When you're evaluating their writing, you're evaluating their thinking. And the purpose of evaluating their thinking is not so much to grade them, to put them in the appropriate bin, but to provide them with the corrective feedback that would enable them to become better thinkers, right? When you're criticizing someone, if you're doing it in a sophisticated way, you're helping them separate the wheat from the chaff. I mean, one of the things I learned as a grader of essays, let's say, was that one of the most effective things I could do to students wasn't to circle what they did wrong, which was often 95% of the essay. But seriously, like, our school system does a very bad job of teaching people to write. I had super bright kids in the 4th year of university who they were terrible at writing. And they could learn quickly because they were smart, but no one had ever taught them. That was an awful thing to see after 16 years of education. One of the things I learned was, I'd be wading through a mess of cliches and second-rate thought and quasi-copying or not precisely Claudine Gay's sin, let's say, but close to it. Plagiarism. And then now and then, it would be as if the student's actual genuine intelligence popped up briefly through all the mess, and they said something clear and useful. And people do this in your relationships with them. All the time, is they'll offer you a kind of mishmash of what they think you want, or maybe even what they think they want, or what they should offer. And if you really listen, then now and then you'll hear the person say something that they really mean and that's true. And if you reward that, because you can if you learn to listen, if you reward that, then more of that will happen. Now, that can be daunting, because you got to ask yourself if you really want to know what your wife thinks of you, for example. But in the long run, it's probably a better idea than finding out in divorce court, 25 years later. So people will hide bits of wheat in the chaff, and what you do as a discriminating critic is dispense with the chaff but identify the wheat. This is a really important thing to know when you're mentoring people, when you're grading, but when you're communicating with people in general. What you're really looking for, if you're wise, are things to reward. Now, you dispense with everything that's second rate, not because you want to criticize and get rid of or rise above the person that you're criticizing morally, but because you want to get to the wheat. And it was frequently the case, for example, when my students were maybe writing the first essay of the semester, that literally 95% of what they wrote was just painful. Would have been easier just to rewrite the essay than to grade it, and so seriously. But, one of the things I noticed is that if I circled a couple of sentences that were genuine thought, the students were so thrilled that someone had noticed when they dared to put their head up above the parapet and say something they believed to be true and genuine, that the next time they wrote an essay, it would be more like 30 or 40% that. And then if they got further reward for that, assuming they had the talent and the diligence, then perhaps by the end of the semester, it would be like 90% genuine thought, genuine wheat. And then they were thrilled about that too, because people are thrilled to have the opportunity to offer their best, especially if it's received in the right manner. People will often obfuscate and produce what's second rate because they're terrified in their heart of hearts that if they did reveal themselves genuinely, which is also a way of making yourself vulnerable because it lets people see who you really are. If they did reveal themselves genuinely, that would be rejected. And so part of the reason that my students delivered such dross to begin with was because they had a history of having what they offered that was good ignored or condemned. And so often they'd hide under the cliches, they'd hide under giving the professor what he wanted to hear so they would get a good grade, because they had sickened of the risk of doing something genuine and having it be rejected. And that's something else to know in your relationships, man. You got to be very careful not to punish the people around you that you love for doing something good, because you can eradicate what's good with punishment quite rapidly. And so it's a deep thing to understand that you need to be watching the people around you all the time to see when they hit the target and to point that out. And people love that. If you do that to people around you, they'll be so thrilled with you, you could hardly stand it, right? Because all people but those who are utterly nihilistic and faithless will risk offering something genuine from time to time in the desperate hope that it is in fact noticed and appreciated. And if you can transform yourself into the sort of person who notices that and rewards it, then people will bring their best to you, and that's a great deal.